in this room, a group of people are going to start a discipleship ministry that can impact your family and that can impact your work life. And so real quick on that, Nate, I'm going to mix this up because I was long-winded. And so we're going to cut to the chase on this. You told me that Regen Ministry, even though you're a pastor, impacted you incredibly as a husband and dad. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, one of the biggest things going through the process of Regen for me had a lot more to do with my relationship with my wife and as a father with my kids. And so the cool thing about going through this discipleship program was it was equipping me as a father and a husband to really kind of release things that I think the devil kind of throws at you. Sometimes they're little burdens or bitterness or just things that the devil knows that'll trip you up. And as a father, if you know me, I've got 4 kids under the age of 7, and a lot of things can be thrown my way. And so for me, learning strategies and tools to go through a process of just letting things go before the Lord, and it was a huge thing for me as a father, because sometimes I feel like I need to be in control of my kids in a way that just like the idea of driving your kids, sometimes in habit, sometimes in just what I expect of them. And sometimes what that is for me is just holding on real tight to this idea of that I'm their father and I need to control all of this. But realizing through going through this Regen discipleship program, the idea of letting go, and I know Pastor Kevin has talked about this idea of gripping on so tightly that we're white-knuckled, but then realizing that all we need to do is just open it up before the Lord. And so as a father, it's been huge for me because some of the strategies and tools have been really good advice for me to teach my children. And so it's trickling down. And so my kids, I can teach them the process of forgiveness and of letting go of bitterness and allowing the Lord to work in and through them. And really what that does for them in the long term is it constantly is this habit of releasing those burdens, those things in our backpack that just don't need to be there. And I think naturally we like to hold on to those things. And then as a husband, it's been really great for me because the same concept, you just want to be in control of your life in a way that you feel that you know the direction and that you feel that you know what would be good for your family. And for me, understanding this idea of letting it all loose before the Lord and just allowing the Lord to work in our relationship, my wife and I. And I remember a year or 2 of our marriage that we had a hard time, and I remember this idea of just holding on so tightly and thinking that I could solve all of these problems, and recognizing pretty quick, and I think this comes through just a life of my parents teaching me growing up, of just letting it go. And when I did that, that's when we discovered more joy and more life in our relationship. And Regen has really emphasized that and has really reminded me of that and has really honed in some of those tools and those practices in my life as a child of God to really stop looking at all this out of my children and my wife and really keep my eyes on the Lord and allow Him to draw us closer together as a family and draw more joy out of our life.
Awesome. So last week, Brooks shared. Brooks is a layperson that's leading Regen Ministry, and I'm going to ask you that same question about couples in just a minute. But this is his lovely wife, Belinda. And Belinda, how many kids do y'all have? 8 kids, so plenty of opportunities to apply this passage. How did the Regen Ministry impact you, and how can it impact our families here at River Point?
Well, I started attending the meetings because my husband had struggled with some addiction, and I wanted to be there to support him. And but what I realized was I'm pretty much the natural. I was living in the natural 100%. I had a very strong desire. I've been to the altar many times wanting to surrender that control, wanting to live in the supernatural, but I just really didn't know how. And I found out through working the steps that I lived with such fear. Fear, really, like, it was my responsibility that my children come to know the Lord. It's my responsibility that my husband stays sober. It's my responsibility, this, and this. And the Lord really, through Regen, showed me the steps and helped me work through a day-by-day process of surrendering to Him, because you can come to the altar, and oftentimes when you leave walking it out, we don't know how, because we go back to what's natural, what's familiar, and we get back into that rut. And so, like Nate was saying, the tools help us, the steps help us to know how to live. Really, for me, it was our identity in Christ. It taught me more and more who I am in Christ and my authority in Christ. So, as a wife, I think we're more united. I know that Brooks is not only working his sobriety, but he's working to know Christ more, to become more like Christ. And I think for our kids, they're all here. You can ask them if you want. I feel like we are more open to sharing our struggles from the past, our current struggles with them. We talk more about, we see people who are struggling, that they need freedom. They don't need judgment. Truth still needs to be spoken. But people need freedom, and I think people are craving freedom. Our ladies, we cried enough to fill a lake every week, desiring freedom, praying for freedom, wanting freedom, but not quite knowing how to walk that out. And Regen helped us to learn how to walk that out, and we will continue to learn to walk that out till we go to heaven.
Awesome. That was beautifully said. So, Brooks, I want to ask you a question, because I've had people ask me, I really want to be in Regen, but my spouse serves in children's ministry or youth ministry or is leading a small group somewhere else. Should couples only do Regen if they could do it together? Or is it possible to do it, husband 1 year and wives another year? How would you recommend that?
Most oftentimes couples don't do it together. I think it's great if you can. One of the umbrellas of guidelines that we have when we split up into small groups is what I was thinking about is that we're not here to fix you, make suggestions, or render advice. And so that's one of the things you always have to be careful for as couples both coming into it, so that you're as Pastor alluded to earlier, it's really about you taking care of your 5%, so to speak. I absolutely would recommend or encourage you to do it. Just because your husband or your wife can't do it is because we have all this brokenness and all this hurt and all this stuff and baggage and the backpack stuff in our lives that we do carry into our marriages. And we don't know how to contend with it, and we don't know how to confront the fear, contend with the insecurities and the not feeling enough and the lack of completeness, and then that affects our relationships. And those types of feelings especially affects our relationships that are closest to us, so our spouse. So it's going through, even though your spouse cannot, is a great way to just point to Jesus. Every way.
Awesome. The other thing you've shared with me is on those nights, men in the small group context, men meet with men, women meet with women, so you're not going to directly be with your spouse. If you can do it together, so the process is working alongside of each other, great. But if not, here's what I would say to you. If God's tugging at your heart for something different in you so you can operate in the supernatural, it's never too early to do the right thing. So, hey, thank these guys real quick for that. So in light of that, this morning on the back of the chair back in front of you, there is a